Lead had been mined here by the American Indians for probably centuries, you know. And then the Spanish, and then the French, and then the Americans came in. People just flooded here, miners, mainly men, of course, in this case. And they flooded in here from 1820, 26, 27 to the early 1830s, 10,000 miners showed up here. I mean, it was huge. And not just Mineral Point, but the whole region. So they came from the east, but they also came up from the south. A lot of them came up from Kentucky, Missouri, and Tennessee. Missouri specifically because there was lead down there as well, in sort of southeast Missouri. And so this was natural to come up here. In this one account, about 1835, this traveling individual was going along, and he says how beautiful the countryside is. It's green. You have a few trees here, a few prairie here, you know, and green grass. Just gorgeous, he talked. And the rolling hills, it's just beautiful. Then he comes over a rise, and he sees Mineral Point area. And it's a moonscape. It's a moonscape because of lead mining in this case. They had hundreds of miners, holes, dug, dirt. They would dig a hole and then go down into the hole, and then of course you'd dig the lead out, put it in a bucket, and wind it up. And you needed fuel, which was the trees. That's why they cut the trees down. You would mine the lead, clean it with the water, and then smelt it or melt it with the fire. And so that's just no trees. In fact, there was this tree dendrochronologist at the university here. He studied a lot of the trees, especially around Shullsburg, which was south of here, but lead mining area. And all of the old trees date back to the 1860s. He found nothing earlier because everything was cut down. And it would have been the same at Mineral Point. And then the companies come in the 1860s, 70s, and 80s and onward. And that goes on until the 20s. Till after World War I, zinc was important for various things and whatnot, and that went on. And then it starts to die out after that. Lawyers, more of the professions, I would say in this case, because you have Moses Strong, who was a lawyer, and you had Henry Dodge. They were both Governor Henry Dodge at that time. He was our first territorial governor, but also he was, both Dodge and Moses Strong were on the first vestry. There were 12 members, and those two guys were on there. Land speculator, that was quite common back then. These land speculators would come out, they would actually buy the land, or actually had a lot of correspondence back and forth between here and the East Coast or wherever, Pennsylvania, New York usually, describing the land and selling it and paying the taxes for these people. It was regular business, and they made money. I know and Moses Strong made good money on it. John Roundtree out of over in Platteville, he was a land speculator. He was first a lead miner, smelter, that kind of a thing. And then he moves, in the latter 30s, he moves into land, and he made money off of land. Same thing with Moses Strong is what they did. It was organized December 8th, 1839. Before that date, of course, as Bishop Jackson Kemper had come out here a few times and had service and stuff, Episcopal service in the courthouse. And then finally in 1846 to 48, they got going and they built the church. The first service was Sunday, October 29th, 1848. And Ebenezer Williams was the priest. The Episcopal Church differed from other churches originally because the original churches, like in the East, if you go back farther in the 1700s and stuff, they were more squarish, and it was for the oratory. And then the Episcopal Church, especially one of the most influential churches, was the Old North Church in Boston. And that sort of set the standard for Episcopal churches, and it's longitudinal. It's a rectangle, basically, designed just like this one, designed for the Eucharist, to emphasize the Eucharist. And that's how, with a steeple. So you have steeples and rectangles, basically, for church construction. And another classic one would be Trinity Episcopal Church in Platteville. It's the same thing. Gothic Revival, same kind of architecture. The first organ was a Henry Urban organ. It was purchased in 1853-54, shipped in. Henry Urban was a famous organ maker in New York City. It's a smaller organ, 5 feet wide, and it's Gothic, it's very Gothic. And it sounds like sort of a carnival, it's high pitch, but that's what they bought. And that was quite the organ in the day. And it was here from 1853-54, obviously for the consecration, and until 1907. In 1907, they bought the current organ, and that original Henry Urban organ. In 1912, it was transferred over to Trinity Episcopal Church in Platteville, and it's still there today. But in any case, in 1907, they replaced the Urban organ with this organ. And since then, it's been updated and all that. But the organ, the case, the wooden structure here is, to me, it's stunning. Of all the things in this church, when you walk in, it's the organ that just stuns me. It's so beautiful. A lot of the windows, they're beautiful windows, and the Belgian windows would be the oldest. They're in the 1850s, 1859, I think. But then you have these other pictorial windows, you could call it. My favorite is definitely Saint Cecilia. Saint Cecilia was the patron saint of music, and it's no coincidence that it's set right there by the organ. And that window was dedicated to the organist Jenny Milton Smith. In 1855, the church was consecrated. On June 12th, I found this in the John Milton papers in the archives where I work. On June 12th, a parishioner went in and bought 3 pounds of spermaceti candles. Those are candles that are manufactured from sperm whales, is what it is. Sperm candles were very prized, and they were expensive. The regular tallow candles were okay, but a sperm candle was put out twice the light. It was virtually odorless, and it was just a very clean, bright light. And so obviously they wanted the church to be brightly lit for the consecration, and that's why they bought those candles. And then it was consecrated on June 14th, 1855 with Jackson Kemper. And I know that's minutia, but it brings to life what's going on. The first baptism was like 1845. The first confirmation was 1848. The first marriage was 1846. But the first wedding that took place in the church here was January 1st, 1856. Before that time, the priest would go out, usually to the bride's parents' house, usually the way it worked. One of the marriages that I found fascinating was Richard Dixon married Esther Madden. They were black individuals. And it took place May 26, 1850 in Mineral Point, but not in the church here, but at whoever's house. So the thing that pleased me about that, in a sense, is that it shows you at least Trinity Episcopal Church was sort of ahead of the curve there in terms of race relations, at least that, because there are a couple earlier marriages of black individuals in the civil records, but this is the first one that I found. The earliest I found a religious ceremony that would have taken place. So that's again the name of Richard Dixon and Esther Madden, and they lived in the Mineral Point area. One of the most influential groups, women's groups of the church here, was the Episcopal Church Ladies Sewing Society. They were the ones in 1852, in terms of the church is constructed. I'll take you back a little bit. The church is opened at least in October of 1848. 4 years later, in 1852, the ladies of the Sewing Society decided they wanted to expand the chancel area. And that chancel behind you was built to their specifications from 1852 to 53 originally the altar was closer, but they wanted that, the new chancel area. But that tells you a lot. It tells you the influence of the ladies. Jane Inwood, she came here in 1836, but I ran into Jane in 1842 in records, and they were holding an election, and it says this election held at the house of, usually John Smith or whatever, usually a guy, but all of a sudden it's Jane Inwood, and I thought, they're holding an election at a lady's house. She can't even vote. How is this happening? Long story short, I found out her name was Jane Henwood. And she came from Cornwall, that area, 1836. And she married a man named John Henwood. And they come here and they farm and whatnot. And he is very violent toward her, so she leaves him. Domestic violence, she leaves him. And in 1836-37, she sets up an inn that became the public place. And so that's why they're holding elections in her house, a tavern. Henwood, her husband, comes back and he sweet talks her into going out to California. They go out to California in 1850. He decides he's leaving her. So he hitches the horse, takes her trunk, everything. She had only the clothes on her back, and he leaves. Comes back to Wisconsin. She's left with nothing but the clothes on her back in the middle of California. But what does she do? She opens a tavern. And over the winter, this is 1850-51, she raises enough money, she comes back to Mineral Point in 51, and she sues him for divorce. She ends up passing away in 1862-63. She couldn't read or write, and she did all this herself. I love history. I love the 19th century, early 20th century history. I love to see how the mechanics of life. That's why when I'm researching this church, I originally did a presentation on it 7 years ago, I think, on the history of it. And the spermaceti candles just made my day. I'm looking, because I work in the University of Wisconsin-Platteville Archives, Southwest Wisconsin Room it's called, and we have all sorts of old ledgers and diaries and whatnot. And one of the ledgers store ledgers is John Milton's ledgers from a store that was in Mineral Point here, and so when I'm researching this history here, I'm thinking, Mineral Point, let's go to those ledgers, and you're just scrolling through it till you find. Trinity Church does this or buys this, So it's the mechanics of life there. I just love to see, and it's also, I call it the chase. I'll run into something, and a person or whatever, and I like to if you can figure out what's driving that person, and you can do it. If you can figure that out with the records, it's the ultimate natural high for me.